Did you know that the episode you are about to listen to is available on YouTube as a full multi-camera experience? Search for the Murder Police podcast channel on YouTube. Subscribe and see what you have been missing.
She was way different than I was, which I think all siblings are typically, but she was, my mom was very creative, great baker. She was a professional cake decorator for years, and Lydia got all of those genes. So wow. Cooking, baking. In fact, the first thing my son, my little guy, said to me, "Who's going to make my birthday cake?" Because she'd made his birthday cake every year.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Lydia Cassady, Part 1. Welcome back, listeners. Today we are going to talk to my good friend Carolyn Hundley about the brutal domestic violence murder of her beautiful sister Lydia Cassady, which happened on January 5, 2022. Carolyn, thank you so much for coming to join us.
Thank you for having me. I feel really blessed to be here. Thank you.
I'm sorry that we met under the circumstances that we did. But unfortunately, we met under very similar circumstances, and we kind of both know what each other have gone through. And strangely enough, our incidences, which brought us together, happened literally 1 month and 1 day apart.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wanted to thank you, too, for taking the time and having the courage to speak about something that's painful. One of the goals that me and Wendy have in this is to let the people out there know Lydia is other than a number or something they saw in a flash in a news article, because that's unfortunately what it is, about who she was as an individual. And one more time, too, is back to Angie's case, if there's anything we can let people know about what these signs might look like and give people a little more courage to make the big moves in their lives that are very difficult. Yep. Hopefully there will be a message in this, too. So thank you again for coming.
Well, I appreciate it. And if, again, to celebrate my sister, just to keep her name recognized out there, as well as if it keeps one other person from being 6 feet under.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
absolutely.
Well, Carolyn, start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have a family now of, I have 2 boys. I have a little guy who's 8 and a big guy who's 20. And we now have custody of my niece and nephew, who are shortly will be 18 and just turned 17. So I have been in the hospitality business for about 25 years. So in and out of hotels, lodging, and things like that. So,
well, how neat. Well, and, I had the fortune of coming to your beautiful home, which I was blown away when I saw your home. I've never seen a home like that. I don't know if you can't call it pole barn because that's not what it is, but it's the most massive, amazing place that you have out there. And, I don't know that I knew you were in hospitality, but it all makes sense, that platter of food you had laid out for all of us when we got there. And it was just so welcoming. And it was a tribute to your sister. And it was just a really nice, it was a very nice evening despite the circumstances that we were there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all due to my husband, the pole barn, and they call them barn dominiums. And so he's, we bought some land and he had a dream, and we've created that dream, and it's just a beautiful place. So,
oh, it's amazing.
And you look back on it and you go, gosh, we made it a little bit extra big, with extra bedrooms for people to come and stay.
Yeah.
And little did we know that this past year, we would have 2 additional children in our home. So I think it was just a blessing.
It was, and it worked out perfect. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about Lydia? Tell us who she was.
So Lydia was my little sister. So she was about 11 years younger than I was. My mother had remarried my stepfather, and they didn't think they could have children. And so poof, here comes Lydia. And so my mom was a lot older when she had Lydia. And so I think that's what made Lydia and I so close, is because I kind of played a little bit of mama role.
Sure.
And so she was just, when she was born, I think up until she was like 2 or 3, she was the colic baby. So everybody was like, does all she do is cry right now? It's like, no, hopefully she'll get better.
She does.
But she was also born with a heart defect. And went back then, in 82, the heart world wasn't as advanced as it is today. And when she was born, I mean, my mom was told she may not make it till she's 21.
Oh, wow.
And so we were constantly in and out of, the hospital, medicine. I mean, even when she'd go get her teeth worked on, she'd have to have medicine, like just tons of antibiotics. And finally, all the new wave and new heart stuff came about, and she was given a pig valve as she got a little bit older. And so she lived with a pig valve for a long time, and then did a mechanical valve. So, when she died, she actually had a mechanical valve. But she was just, she was always a younger sister, always tagging along anything we were doing. So she's probably a little older than she probably should have been, especially with me. So she was hanging out with my friends, where we went and what we did. And so again, I think that's why, it's kind of like, kind of felt like you raised her, because she was kind of part of my world, really big time. She was way different than I was, which I think all siblings are typically, but she was, my mom was very creative, great baker. She was a professional cake decorator for years, and Lydia got all of those genes. So cooking, baking, the love for the outdoors, and, she had a fascination and love for horses, and, and I would much rather be inside, or if I'm outside, I'd rather be at a pool, but, she was always kind of the outdoor nature and more of the inside cook, and, just knew how to make something. And the coolest thing is she was didn't matter what you got, she could taste it and then make it.
Wow.
And so, even things like certain sauces and stuff. And, I remember one time getting takeout and going, oh my gosh, they didn't put the tzatziki sauce or whatever it was from the Greek restaurant. She goes, do you have this, this, and this? And I'm like, yeah. Oh, okay. Give me a second. And I mean, it tastes just like it.
Oh, wow.
So she's just really good at that kind of stuff.
A big threat to Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Exactly.
I'm picturing them with that handcuffed briefcase now that they used to tote that around in. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. Very creative, crafty. You see something, she's painting stuff. And, she'd always go to those paint classes and things, where they did the paint and the wine and all that. And, I would try to do something. It looked like a kindergartner, and hers would look like it would come out of the art museum. It's like, okay, we see who got the creative genes here.
So growing up with Lydia, I'm guessing, like you said, you all had that age in between you. So I can see you were a mother figure, but also she probably very much looked up to you. And then you to her as you all got older with her creativity.
Oh yeah. Well, and you always had her, it was like you would partner the two of us. It's like, okay, every family event, it was like, okay, I'm going to need you to cook this and bake that. And I'm going to get this, and I'll make sure everybody's invited. And I was always the front person, and she was always the person doing all the work in the back scene. And she was just great at making sure that everybody had, the foods tasted great. The cake was, in fact, the first thing my little guy said to me, who's going to make my birthday cake?
Oh,
when he found
she
out.
passed.
Oh. Because she'd made his birthday cake every year. Oh. But she'd made my older son's birthday. So that was like one of the first, so I mean, that's how memorable her stuff was,
Did you all grow up here in Nicholasville?
We actually grew up in Scott County. Well, I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and my mom and stepdad moved to Scott County, Georgetown. And he was with the phone company World. And we moved there, and that's where Lydia was born, in Georgetown. Well, actually in Lexington, but Georgetown.
Grew up in Georgetown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's where she went to school and graduated. And
so moving on into her adulthood, tell us, as she got older, prior to getting into this very volatile relationship with Ken Strange, to be exact. Had she dated much before then, or was he kind of her first real relationship?
She didn't date a whole lot. She had a lot of guy friends, a lot of guys that, was in her circle of friends. And then she, right out of high school, fell in love with a young guy and they got married. And I think got married obviously a little too young. And so that didn't work out. So about a month in, that came to a stop. And, and that's when she actually met Ken. So, and Ken was, he's 14 years older than she was.
Wow. How old was she when she met him?
Oh, that's a good question. It was 2004 when she met him, probably late in 2004. So I'd have to do
so
math.
Maybe 28,
27,
8, maybe.
She was born in 82.
Oh,
my math. So she was like early 20s.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. She was young. Okay.
Yeah.
So how did they meet and how'd they start dating?
Met at work. And I don't know that there was a whole lot of dating. I think they met at work. I think she was actually living with my husband and myself there in the interim. And from that, I think at that point it was, you're kind of moving in with me.
Oh.
And so she actually moved right into his house. Yeah. And he had there were two older siblings by another woman. And they were still within the home there, I think, for the last year or so. So, but they moved in together. Yeah.
And then they ended up having 2 children together that you now have.
Yeah. Pretty immediately, I would say within 4 to 6 months, she was pregnant with my nephew. Yeah. And he was born in 2005. And then my niece was born 13 months later in 2006.
Wow. And she and Ken, they never married. Is that right? They
never married. And he didn't want to be on their birth certificates. So
That's
really?
interesting.
Did anybody ever figure out why?
I think it was probably twofold. I think, Lydia said he didn't want to be on them because of any type of accountability. And the flip side was there was also some government more assistance that they could get.
Oh.
Because he was a truck driver. He made good money. So he wasn't going to be, they weren't going to be able to get any government assistance if he put his name on them.
Yeah, sure. Mm.
So oddly enough, I'm not sure that I know a man that may not put their name on their children's birth certificates.
It's still different. Yeah. Even though I can kind of see a strategic thing to it, but it's not a great strategic thing.
No.
It's I think it's my personal opinion, knowing guys, is it's like the bailout option.
Yeah.
Deniability.
My husband would say, what man doesn't put his name on his kids?
Yes.
So they don't have his last name.
They have my sister's last name. Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
Now, during this long courtship they had you all ever seen any problems, any red flags?
So we had very limited first access to him other than between her living with us and us trying to figure out what was going on with everything. And then her immediately kind of moving in with him. There was a little bit of, I think it was more like, I've got this thing, like I'm grown up now, I'm on my own, or I'm going to get on my own. And even to the point that my mother, at first blush was, oh, this guy's older. He's more established. He's got a good job. He's got a home, almost like he's going to be the knight, the white knight in shining armor.
Yeah, who saves the day.
That's right. And both my husband and I, from point A, especially my husband, was like, he's not a good guy. He is, just, kind of like what you were saying too, David, in reference to Angie, when you kind of meet, you're like, And so, there were some definite red flags in the beginning. At one point in between my nephew's, my niece being born and my nephew was born, I remember driving home, and we lived way out in the country at the time. And I remember my mother calling me and screaming on the phone when I answered the phone. And she's like, he said he's coming home. He's driving home. He's on the road, his truck driver. He's coming home and he's going to kill her. And he's threatened to kill her. And I'm like, what? You need to calm down. And has she called the police? And really nothing really came of that because, I was kind of like, she needs to get out of the house, call the police. She doesn't need to be home. And then I think it all got kind of, I don't know, watered down or downplayed from my sister after that point, because I think, she knew better,
I think they know that you get those reactions, and I feel like with Angie anyway, I felt like she deep down knew that I knew. Mm-hmm. So she didn't want to tell a lot because she knew my reaction. But, like you said that your husband said, when I first met Angie's murderer, I came home and I told David, I do not like him. There's something bad about him. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you met him, you also said, oh, he's not a good guy. Yeah. And I did voice that to her. Yeah. And she's, kind of maybe like Lydia did with, maybe, I know Angie said, oh, you're just being protective of me, just give it time. Mm-hmm. You really don't know him. He's so nice. And I really think deep down they know, but they want so badly to be loved and needed.
There's some biases that come up. I think I've said it before, but a guy I used to work with, Charlie O'Connell, we lost him a couple of years ago, rest in peace. But when I was a young police officer, I was riding with Charlie one night and he said, Davey, you can't argue with somebody that's drunk or in love. Mm-hmm. And no truer words have ever been spoken. So I think there's that built-in confirmation bias that people have on they fall into advocacy so hard. That's why it's so hard to reach people. Yeah. It's because, like you said, Wendy, they just want to be loved.
Yes.
That's what this comes down to. So.
Well, and I think, in a lot, and what I see now that I've been diving into a little bit more of the domestic violence stuff, I mean, what I see out there too is, just like my sister, she lacked self-confidence. Mm-hmm. She wasn't a good communicator. Like she struggled with that, like communicating, like what she loved to do. She was great at, like horses and all the stuff. And there at the end, her medical stuff, she was great at that piece, but communicating of this is a problem, Carolyn, we need to some of those things came towards the very end, but not in the early days.
Yes.
I think for her, it was, I've now found this man. He's established. Mom likes him. He's going to take me away and take care of me, and everything's going to be grand. And while anyone on the outside, most of us, now excluding my mother at first, but I think as soon as we got into that first year, Mom was like,
she started seeing it.
Yeah. And again, mom died in 2017. And those last 2 years of my mother's life, I mean, she was calling him out publicly and I would literally, when he would leave and they would leave, I'd look at Mom and go, you're not making this any better. I get it that you've got something with him, but you're only making it worse for Lydia because she's not going to be able to come here. And that's exactly what happened the last 2 years of my mother's death. Like they came on holidays, but they weren't allowed to kind of come and hang out and, hang out with Mama like they used to, because he's going to put a stop to that.
Well, her intuition's on fire.
Yeah.
And then the protectiveness, the mama.
And I'm guessing it probably was much like Angie, that the phone calls they'd sneak and make them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then delete the call log or delete the text. We went through that. Yep. And, much like you said, Angie, Angie was so confident with so many things. She was so smart, kind of like your sister. Now, she did not have problems communicating anything as far as being outspoken. And I think that ultimately was her demise. Mm-hmm. But she, had dealt with her weight for so long, and she was heavy. Yep. And I went through the whole gastric bypass, and then she felt so great because she lost 100 pounds. Yep. And that's what took us on our trip that also caused problems. But, he had her gaining weight again and getting more, she would never leave without being so dolled up and beautiful. Mm-hmm. And someone had sent me a picture of her at a particular place, and her hair wasn't fixed. She had no makeup on. Yep. She gained weight back. And I think they beat them down so much. And maybe Lydia went through that as well. And then she stopped for a while, maybe like Lydia did, telling me of the problems. But then at the end, she's like, look, this is what's going on. I need you to help me figure this out. Yeah. And so I think they suppressed that, maybe hoping. Yeah. And that then when they, and then when they see it doesn't, they realize that it's bad. Yeah. then they reach out for that help. And sadly, in both of our cases, it was too late.
Yeah.
Now, you said that she had met him. He had 2 children by another person. So the children live with him and Lydia. Why did they not live with their mom?
I'm not quite sure. I really don't know that. I'm assuming, because again, control factor for him is I've got my kids.
Could
I would
very
assume.
well be. Could very well
assume.
be. Yeah.
So during this time, they're together. They have these children. Your heckles are a little up, but you're kind of just riding it out.
Yeah. And for us, my husband and I moved a few times in between this as well. So we moved with being in the hospitality business, we had moved up north to Massachusetts and Boston area. We'd then been down in Charlotte and in DC. So during this time, there was a lot of moving and shaking going on, with our worlds as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they grew up, and again, the kids grew up. And I, don't think that life was grand at the home all the time for them either. I think, again, the verbal abuse and things that he would do or say to them, things that they tell me now are just, make your skin crawl on some of the things. And, my nephew, had said that at one point he said, I'm going to pull out every one of your teeth and make them as a necklace and string it as a necklace and, and nail your hands to the kitchen floor and, things that we had never heard that during that time, but just things that you learn about and hear
later
from them, which is just so tragic.
Referencing back to your mom saying that he was going to kill her, what started that fight, or did it just fizzle out and no one ever talked about it again?
No one ever talked about it. She never talked about it again.
You didn't ask her?
Oh, I did.
And she just didn't want to talk about it?
It was just an argument that they had. He was in the truck. He was driving home. He got mad and he started saying, I'm going to kill you, basically.
How long was that before he actually did kill her? Months or years?
Years. That was very early on. That was within the first year of them being together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then it kind of makes you wonder, it's always easy to sit back and think what you'd do. Mm-hmm. And I know unless we're in their shoes, we don't know what we would do. But I would think if someone threatened that of me, he's not home, I'm just going to go on and leave. I'm going to take my kid and I'm leaving.
That's right.
But I'm sure, probably like most domestic abusers do, they smooth it over. Yeah. I was just angry. I was stressed. I'm so sorry.
So sorry. I love you.
I would never do that. You're my whole life. You're my whole world.
Yeah.
And they suck them right back in.
That's right.
Until next time.
And anything you do on the research of domestic violence, the average woman leaves the house 7 times.
Wow.
She'll leave the house 7 different times before she actually either leaves or dies.
Wow.
So
there's so much front end control and maintained control. The whole cycle of it is pretty vicious, and it's soft.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is that it doesn't have anything to do with people who aren't smart. That's not what the problem is with it. It's just, I think I've told you before, Wendy, is the ones that I met were really gifted at this in a scary way.
Yeah.
But like any other sociopath or psychopath, there's a gift to that. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty sickening.
Well, and I think when you look at it too, especially for him, it was all control, right? He owned everything. Everything was in his name. Lydia did not have a good, steady income. She raised babies, mm-hmm. for most of her time. So there was no means for her to do anything different. Now, she had means around her, a support system around her. But I think for her at the time, especially when she was raising the kids, it was like, oh no, we'll get through this, kind of thing. And I'm on my own and I've got, I think for her, it was, he's going to be my savior. And I think she didn't realize until the kids were I think she knew there was something not right all the way through. But I think until the kids were grown and, after that, I think things started to really, and I think as she matured, right? Because she's still really young.
Sure.
And, I think as she matured, started realizing this is not right. Most days she couldn't stand him. And that's so sad. Who wants to live their life every day?
Just miserable.
Miserable. Just absolutely
Now,
miserable.
did he allow her to work, or was she just chose not to?
She didn't work. Well, he didn't allow her to work when the kids like were doing their thing, right? When she was raising the kids early on. As they got a little bit older and able to kind of go with her and do things, she actually got a volunteer position at one of the equine places. And that worked out great because she could bring the kids with her. She could have them do stuff with her at the horse place. They could help clean stalls and, do some things. And time was flexible. So when she needed to be home, when dinner needed to be served.
She could be there.
That's right. And she could take 19 phone calls in the day, because that was definitely one of the things that, he was in a truck he's a regional truck driver. So he was in a truck
for hours.
Hours and hours and hours. And all he did was phone and call all the time. And then when he wasn't in the truck, we would go just for the day. We literally would say, hey, we're going to go shopping and grab some lunch, just me and her or whatever. And I couldn't tell you how many times he'd call. It'd be like 7 times, and I'd be losing my mind going, you're doing the same thing you were just doing. Like,
it's so funny because, and I know you're thinking what I'm thinking.
Exactly.
As you heard me say on the podcast, when Angie and I went on that trip together, it was calling, texting, or FaceTiming. And it was the whole time from breakfast to now we're done with breakfast. We're going back to change. I'll call you when we get up to the room to change. We're going down to get our beach chairs. I'll call you when we get down there. Yeah. All day long. And, I'm wondering also if he didn't okay her working at the volunteering at the equine, because when you've got your kids, you're probably not going to be out doing anything you shouldn't because you got kids with you.
Yep.
And so they're kind of tethered to you. Yep. So she's still not free to do really what she wants. And I'm surprised he even allowed her to go shopping or to eat with you, because that came to a stop. Well, hidden. We hid and did it, but that came to a stop also.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I know at this point, I know that for, my husband and I, it was always, it was almost like we knew who we were dealing with, right?
Yeah.
You knew what kind of character he was, but you also knew to see my sister and my niece and nephew, you can't alienate him. Like, you can't be mad at him.
Right.
And all this
you have to include him.
That's
and pretend
right.
like you like him.
And exactly. And so, for us, and especially for me, it was always to try and be inclusive, right, with him, because I wanted access to her because, she was my she was my baby, and I wanted my niece and nephew, who are my kids now, but, my niece and nephew, I wanted to be able to have access to them. And I knew if you alienated him,
you're done with her too.
It's done.
Yes.
It's done. And so we were always very inclusive with him, always tried to make him feel comfortable at Christmas. My husband and I would buy him gifts. Every holiday, we tried to always include him. Now for him, I think that was his only reason why, because she would vacation with us, like go to Pigeon Forge, or she went to my 50th birthday party a year before she died. She flew into Panama City, and spent 3 or 4 days with me, some things like that. But one of the funny things he would always say is, Carolyn, you're the only one I don't have anything bad to say about. And I would always go, that's good, Ken. I'm glad about that.
Little do you know how I really feel about you.
And, but I always, and the sad part, I always tried to, respect his position with Lydia. That was her boyfriend. That was the father of my niece and nephew. She's not making a change anytime soon. Mm-hmm. So
you have to deal with what you got.
That's right. And so, as much as, you were just like, because half the time he would leave events or leave our, house, you'd be sitting there going, oh my gosh, he's awful. Like, or whatever he said, or tick somebody off. He's very aggressive and overbearing. And just, I think my husband would call him sometimes uncouth, like just things that he would say or do. You'd be like, why are you doing that? You know,
what a tightrope in a family dynamic. And it's another part of this ripple effect of this whole thing of how that control works out. And I'm going to bet the reason that he said that to you is he felt phenomenally successful. You were very successful in getting that out, and he felt like he controlled you really well. They love that
Yes.
too. Is though if they think that they've manipulated you hard enough and you've fallen in, then they hold a different place in your heart.
Well, it's so funny because you always would say about Anton, he hates you because he's scared of you. I'd say, wonder why he doesn't challenge me, or because some of her ex-husband's family members he had reached out to, because Angie's ex-husband was murdered also. And she kind of reconnected with his family because they were the aunt and grandmother to her children that she had with that ex-husband. So they all kind of rekindled, and he messaged them and said, you will not message her anymore. I am her husband now. Yep. You're done. And so I asked David one day, I said, wonder why he doesn't message me and say, do not message her no more. She has me now. And he said, I think he's scared of you.
Well, you are the voice of reason. And there's a barrier there, is that if anybody was going to get in her ear, he knew that would be you. And that he probably, and you're at a high type D, an alpha person, is that he could envision you probably throwing a flour sack over her head and putting her in a van and taking her away from him. I mean, there's a certain line. I think you were so successful that he really felt like he had manipulated you. But you were doing a great job about, because I'm with you about how do you handle that? Because one, respecting Lydia and that relationship, even if it's not the one you would desire for her, and then the kids. Yeah. Right. What a hard thing to do, commendable thing to do.
Now, did Lydia have a best friend that she kind of told her that, was it a Wendy and Angie with Lydia and someone else?
She had a really good friend there towards the end, but not long enough before that, right? Yeah. She actually had a dear friend that was my niece's mom, who had become almost like a really close best friend. In fact, her and I had even talked with Lydia about 3 months before she died. I mean, we had literally been on the phone, her and I, this friend, talking about how we could actually put Lydia down under. Like literally, like the friend had a rental home, a possibility where he would not know this home. We had talked about, being able to give her some money, she'd have to cancel the cell phones. I mean, just a lot of things would have to happen to start over. And when we talked to Lydia about it, it's funny you look back now, but when we talked to Lydia about it, it was, I can't be away from you and Daryl. And, and Boo Boo and, all the family. And I'm, because that was her big thing is, you all are my only support, right? I can't be away from.
Was there a way to secretly still see her, though, if you all moved her somewhere?
Probably not, just because he was so super, like when it came to that kind of stuff, we were just scared that, he would know that she would want to be with us or seeing us. And that was too much to even, so it was like we'd come up with the option of, okay, you got to either do this, go down under kind of world, almost like with the Greenhouse 17, you kind of go off the radar, the grid. Or, you got to get a plan to get out and start that plan. So she decided to go down that route.
If you are a victim of domestic violence or partner violence, please call your local police department or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. There are resources available to help you and your family. Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.